Hello and welcome back to the Python Beginners course. This is part 2, Python Inputs. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Now what we are able to do is to take an input from a user and store it in a variable. And this is of course different from the first tutorial where we predefine the values of our variables. As a quick reminder, this is part 2 of the Python Beginners course. Now you can take this course in any order that you wish, but I have tried to make this course progressive in that it does get more difficult as we move through each component. This module of learning is similar to the other modules in that we're going to walk through multiple examples and then I'm going to present you with some code challenges. Now in this tutorial, in actual fact, we're going to run through some small projects. The great thing about Python and programming is that even with the smallest amount of information, we can start to action this code into something that we can understand. So these projects here, we're going to build a pizza slice calculator. Okay, that's not necessarily something that we would probably want to build, but it just allows us to put the code into context. So an age calculator and then a restaurant bill calculator. In my opinion, at least, I think it's very important that we action code as much as possible to get a deeper understanding of how to utilize Python. So I'm assuming you have Visual Studio Code or a text editor and Python installed. When you're ready, let's get started. So taking input in Python. So this is incredibly easy. So let's build upon our knowledge from the previous tutorial, variables. So we're going to create a variable called x. Now, I realize that variables, we should try to name the variables in some way that we can understand potentially what that variable is referring to or referencing, what type of data or what data is referencing to. So here I'm just using X, Y, and Z just for simplicity. So we want to take an input, so we're going to use input function. Right, so you can see here that it's going to produce a prompt in our terminal, in this case, which is going to read a string from a standard input. So the user is going to type in a string into the input. That's going to be saved to our variable. So what we can do here is we can add some text that we want to show the user, enter your name, for example. And let's just save that. And then it's just a case now of running this. So here I've just created a file called example.py. So I'm just going to run that. So this is just knowledge from the previous tutorial. I'm just assuming that you understand this. And there we go. So we have this prompt here now. And we just need to type in our name. And there we go. Now, of course, we want to show that is actually saved in the variable. So we just use print. Again, knowledge from the previous tutorial. Let's just go ahead again. Let's type in our name. And there we go. So you can see it's outputting the name that was typed in. So at this point, any text that we type in here is going to be converted or it's going to be saved in the variable as a string. Now, what if we wanted to take or to input an integer, for example? So we just need to utilize again skills that we learned previously. Let's create a new variable called y, and then we go and add another input. So we're going to have one input, and then the other input is then going to be prompted onto the terminal, or initiated, sorry, onto a terminal, so we'll be able to enter more information. So this time we're going to just say enter your age. So you imagine at this point we're just going to take in a name and then an age, and there we go. Right, so that takes in the user name and age. At the moment we're just printing X, so we'll quickly do that again. I apologize. There we go. There we go. Okay, so you can see that it's being saved in the variable and now we can print. Now, let's just go over maybe an input error. Let's have a look at an input error. So let's do this again. Now, this isn't going to work. Apologies. So if you want to close that, Control C will close or stop the program in this case. You can see that's gone back now to the terminal. I'll type in CLS to clear that. Right, so first of all, let's save this input as an integer. So let's just cast this to an integer. Remember, again, from the previous tutorial, we were casting data. In this case, we're now going to take this string and convert it into an integer. This is an age. So we are assuming that the user is going to type in a whole number. So let's try this again. and then the age. So this time we're actually just going to type in a string, see what happens. And you can see here that we get a value error. So Python does its best to identify where this error is. So again, just reading through this, line 2, right? So this is where the problem occurs. So we have a value error, invalid literal for integer with base 10. So this is simply just telling us that this is not a number. It's not an integer, so therefore we cannot save it. It's the wrong value type. So we are told or given an indication that it's expecting base 10, so 0 to 9, for example. So let's go ahead and just type this in again, just to check, see if this works. And there we go. So now I wanted to introduce the idea of string formatting. So let's just take this situation. We wanted to input the name and the age. So we probably wanted to print some sort or construct some sort of sentence here. So for example, X, your name is of the, no, is, and then the age, say, so comma there, is, and then Y. So that, if you remember from the first tutorials, is going to stitch everything together. And there we go. Xander is 18. Now, it might be that you wanted to format this differently. Maybe you wanted this on separate lines. But you can imagine at some point you might want to kind of expand this and have multiple variables being printed out. So I just wanted to introduce, at least for now, we will cover this in the string module later in this course, but I wanted to introduce to you string formatting. Where this is leading to, the point I'm trying to make is that this can get very complicated to work with, or messy if you like, or very untidy to work with in this way. So Python provides us different formatting tools. Now we will cover this in more detail in the fourth module, strings, but I just wanted to introduce you to this now because it's useful for us to know as we move forward. So here, for example, we used commas earlier. So if I use plus here instead, we know that we can't really utilize strings and integers. We're going to need to cast this to a string, for example. So just to give you that example, 18, there we go. So we get a concatenation issue in that this should be a string. So if we wanted to avoid this and maybe automatically convert everything to strings before we print, we have different tools. So I just wanted to introduce to you fstring, so string formatting. So this is the ability to basically define what is printed in a more kind of simplistic way, if you like. So here I'm going to use f, and I'm going to wrap everything around. Okay, so I'll wrap everything around in doubles. Okay, so everything here is going to be a string. Now we know that these variables need to be defined so that we can output what these variables are holding into our string. So what we can do here with f is that if we use the curly braces, we can define the variables in the curly braces. So this is going to get formatted into strings. So we don't need to now cast this or worry about converting this y variable, which is an integer, back into a string. We don't need any concatenation here. We can now remove that. And then we go back. So print name is 18, for example. Okay, so let's give this a go. So you can see that these variables are placed inside of the curly braces. And there we go. So that is one of 3 or 4 different methods we can format strings in a print function. And like I said, we'll have a look at those in the 4th module of this course, strings. Just to extend this slightly based upon what we've learned so far, let's just go ahead and use the new line. So let's just observe the behavior here. Okay, so we're going to need to move that across slightly so we avoid the space. There we go. Right, so that's pretty much all that we need to know about inputs at this point to move forward and start thinking about code challenges. So as I said in the preview, we've got some projects here. So we're going to move over some simple projects Now, these projects might not represent real life situations, but it does start to help us to begin to convert our knowledge into some sort of context, or to utilize Python in some sort of real sense. So let's have a look at the first code project, one pizza slice calculator. So here you're going to create a pizza slice calculator, which will calculate the number of slices left to eat after the user enters the number of slices they have already eaten. So let's assume that the pizza has a maximum of 12 slices. So by all means, go ahead and pause here, have a go. If you don't quite understand, let me just give you some more context here. So we're trying to build a program which will calculate the amount of slices that are left once we've eaten a certain amount of slices. Now we're assuming that the pizza has 12 slices. So this is telling me straight away that this is a number that isn't going to change. It's a constant number. So this is probably going to need to be stored in a variable, number 12. So I'm probably going to make a variable here, probably called slices, and that's going to be a reference point to the integer 12. And of course, I'm going to need that number to perform some sort of calculation, and I'm going to need to take in the user's amount of slices and then perform that calculation. So I pretty much told you the answer to this. So let's have a look now at a potential answer to this problem. So we have 12 slices. So let's just create a new variable here called slices, and we're going to enter the integer value of 12. Right, so we're going to need the user's input. So let's just call this user input, or alternatively user input equals. And we're going to need an input of some sort. So we're going to say enter the number of slices eaten. Okay, so that's the input. So we're going to take that input. We obviously now need to do some sort of calculation. So total left, or total slices left. I'm just going to call this total. And this is going to equal the user input. Oh, sorry, the slices. Take away the user input, right? Okay, so now we have the total amount of slices left. So let's just go ahead and print that. So total slices remaining. So here we're going to use the F format. So let's use the total here. So we'll pass the total into there. And of course, now we need to use F. Okay, so let's give this a go. Enter the number of slices eaten, 6. And we have a problem. Right, so what's the problem here? So you can see that this is one of the problems, this is one of the problems that you may come across. Now you can see here the unsupported operand types, so type and string. Okay, so what's happening here is that potentially what we're trying to do is we're taking this variable which we've named incorrectly. That's the first thing. Okay, and then also we're taking this integer, and remember the input is a string, so we're trying to do a calculation here with an integer and a string. So potentially we need to convert this into an integer, or cast this into an integer, in order for us to actually perform the calculation. So let's give this a go again. 6. And there we go. Well, I do hope that program comes in handy next time you're out eating pizzas. Maybe at some point we can convert that into a mobile phone application. Right, so next up, age calculator. So again, we're just reutilizing the skills. If you do want to skip these small projects at this point, then please do, if you get the grasp and you understand what we've done so far. So let's have a look at an age calculator. So create an age calculator which will show the user's age on their next birthday. So here, as you might imagine, we're going to need to take in the user's age. So we're going to ask the user to type in their age, and then we're literally just going to +1 to that, and then output that, and that will be their age on their next birthday. So first of all, we will take in the user's age. So this is going to be an input. What is your current age? And now we can go ahead and so the next age on their next birthday. So this is going to be a calculation, so age plus 1. So what's going to happen here, of course, is going to take the value that the user has entered. Now remember, that's a string, so we're probably going to need to convert that. Now we could do it here, of course. Let's just cast that into an integer. So now we have the calculation with 2 integers. So this is going to take the age and plus 1 and store it in this variable called age BD for birthday. So we can print that out. Age BD. There we go. So let's just give this a go. What is your current age? 18. There we go. What you're going to eventually find is that there's shortcuts. There's ways to express or to write code in a kind of smaller, succinct way, which to perform the same actions. And although we don't necessarily cover this on this course, it's worth highlighting where we can these certain shortcuts, if you like. So here what I can do is if I type in age and say plus equals 1, what I'm doing here is I'm taking this variable and I'm literally just adding 1 to it. So plus equals, this is a way, and I can do, for example, minus equals and so on with the different mathematical operators. So this is just a shorter way of performing the same action. So now I can type print and then age, and what we have now is exactly what we had before. So we are taking a variable. Remember here, this is a variable reference for this data. So the user types in their age, and this variable reference is then referencing this data, 18 say, whatever the user's typed in. And what we're doing now is we're taking that variable data, age, which is holding say 18, and we're changing it by adding 1 to it. So we're performing this action of adding 1 to the number, and then we're overriding the original number with this new number. So when we print out age variable now, it has that new number stored inside of that variable. So it now prints out the new number. So that brings us to code project 3, which is taking us to that next step. It's a little bit harder for us to think about because we need to understand the scenario and then we need to perform different actions to what we've done previously. So customer bill calculator. So we need to create a customer bill application to allow the waiter to input the name and the final bill total. So clearly we have 2 inputs that we're going to need to take, and the customer is going to be a string, and then the bill, well, if we just think about pounds or dollars, normally have say $10 and cents, or pounds, we have pounds and pence. So we'll probably need to convert this data into a float to allow us to actually store pounds and pence or dollars and cents, for example. So we're going to need to print that to the screen. So print to the screen the user details, the total before and after tax has been calculated. So with the final bill total, we're going to need to perform some sort of calculation and take the bill and add it to the tax. Now we aren't told the amount of tax that we need to apply. So here I'm just going to assume 10% tax. So you can take that number and change it to whatever you like. So the biggest issue here potentially, if you're not too au fait with calculating percentages, is that we're going to need to take the final bill and we're going to need to create a percentage here, aren't we? Because tax is normally say 10% or 20%. So there might be a slight calculation that you're not too sure about. So we'll go through that in the answer. So have a go, maybe pause now, and then we'll go through the solution. Right, so let's go ahead now and think about the solution for this customer bill calculator. Right, so tax. We're going to create a new variable called tax. That is, tax, and that's going to equal 10%. So this is a number which we can change later once we finish. So let's take the text input from the user. So we'll just call this name equals input and then enter the customer's name. Okay. It's really hard with a big microphone in front of me. So the total before tax. So I'm just going to call this total TTB, total before tax. Thank you. So total before tax. So we're going to take in an input, and this is the final bill total. So the bill total, sorry, that's going to be the input. So now the waiter or waitress is going to enter the customer's name and the bill total. Right, so now we need to perform some actions. So tax to pay. So let's work out how much tax we're going to need to pay. So that's going to be the total before tax. Right, so we're going to need that number. We times that by tax, and then we divide by 100. Okay, so that's going to work out the amount of tax that we need to pay based upon the actual bill total. Right, so now we have that number. We can now work out what the total is. So there's a few ways we can do this. So we're just doing this in the most logical way, so we can see all the different actions. So this is going to be the total before tax plus the tax to pay. So that's then going to work out the total bill. So what we can do now is let's just print this all out. So this is going to be the name. So let's type in the name there. So we pass that name in, and then let's go for a new line. Excuse me. Let's go for a new line. So that's the name, and then the total. So that's the total before tax, and that was total before tax. Right. So now we've got that in place. What we can do, we could create a new print. It probably looks a bit tidier here, but let's just continue. So we've got the total on a new line, and then let's create a new line again. And this time we're going to have the tax. So tax. So that's tax to pay. And once we've done that, we then have the final total. So let's go for total. I suppose this should say before tax. So finally then we have total, which is the final total, and that's going to then be the total variable. Right, so let's give this a go. Enter the customer's name, and then total bill total. Let's just go for 100. You can see that we've worked out the tax, which is £10 or dollars or whatever currency, and then the total is going to be 110. So of course we could enter a float. So here we've defined an integer, but in actual fact, we want to take in a float potentially, right? So let's give this a go. Enter the name again. Total bill, say £90 and 90 pence. So here we worked out the tax is £9 9 pence, and then the total is going to be 99.99. So we will, when we go through the maths module, we'll look at how to work with floats to kind of convert. So here, for example, we don't want to produce this number with so many decimal points, for example. So let's just quickly format this. I'll quickly show you this. So our total then, we want to format this so that it only provides, say, 2 decimal points. So let's just take in the calculation and then the comma. And then we're just going to define the fact we want it to 2 decimal points. Okay, so 2 decimal points. Let's just try this again. And we had 90 point, what was it? 90.90. And there we go. So what we've done here is utilize the format function to, first of all, obviously we've calculated, and then we've gone ahead and we've defined 2 decimal points. So now we move on to troubleshooting challenges. Now, for me, this is probably the most valuable type of activity to perform because we need to become familiar. Like I've said before, we need to get familiar with what happens or what to do when there is a problem. So the more problems we have, the better. And I can guarantee, whether it be now or 10 years time when you're still developing, you're going to have problems. Of course, those problems will scale in complexity as you work on larger projects. But the fundamentals can be the same, and it's always good to practice troubleshooting, in my opinion, just to get a better understanding of the code and to speed up that process of troubleshooting code. So here we have the first challenge. You can see straight away from the code that's been highlighted, so potentially here is the problem. But let's just go ahead and run the code to see what the problem, and it says name error hello is not defined. Now, if you remember previously, when we received a name error, it's normally referring to the fact that Python is trying to find a reference point for this string or variable, for example, and it doesn't exist. It's not been defined. So in actual fact, that seems to be the problem here. So let's turn this now into maybe an answer. So hello. So we're going to use the F format here to output this string, hello, and then we use the curly braces to output the variable. So we'll give this a go again. And there we go. Okay, code challenge 2 or troubleshooting challenge 2. Straight away, maybe you can see what the problem is. So let's just give this a go. So this time we have name age is not defined. So a very similar problem again. We have the yellow underlining here to indicate potentially where the problem is. Here it tells us it's on line 3. So if you haven't already spotted it, remember that the variables are case sensitive. We just need to change that back, go for the name, and there we go. And then the final troubleshooting challenge. So just see if you can see this problem straight away. Just read through the code very quickly and see if you can spot the problem. So here we have an input, which is the first name, and then we have an age. And we are printing out a string, and we have casted our integer, but there still seems to be a problem, potentially. So what is that problem? So name and age. So here we have only can only concatenate string, not integer to string. So here we're kind of done the opposite in that we have converted to an integer, but of course now we're trying to print a string and an integer, and that obviously isn't working. So let's just go ahead and maybe we convert it like this. And we run it again, name, age, and there we go. So that was a sweet and hopefully short introduction to Python input. And maybe I embellished a little bit more there because I think, and I do value as much practice as possible to get these basics in place. I do find that some courses online, maybe they work for some people, but if you're completely new to programming, although this may seem a little bit boring going over the same aspects here, getting a firm ground is going to be really important moving forward into more advanced topics. I do hope that was useful for you, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.